for young girls, it really meant preparing you for a job. Because in post-war Cyprus, women were expected to work, but they were not necessarily expected to have ambitions. So ambition was never cultivated in little girls. So little girls could not have big dreams as easily as boys were expected to have them.
My guest today is Dr. Charis Xinari, an associate professor of critical and cultural theory at the European University Cyprus. Dr. Charis Xinari holds a PhD in English Literature and Gender from the University of Edinburgh. Her research focuses on gender, identity, and the politics of culture, including work on how identity formation in everyday life in Cyprus is formed. Charis, welcome to the Future Makers podcast.
Hello. It's a pleasure and an honor, of course.
Thank you. It is my pleasure and honor. It's a real, round moment where I'm actually the one in the seat, kind of leading the conversation.
Yep. You get to get your own back now.
I get to get my own back and ask all the questions I wanted to ask as a student.
That is true.
Because I'm in contact with Nate and Christiana. I know and Dasha and Lisa. They are going to have a blast listening to this. So let's start with a question I ask all my interviewees, and that is quoting Kierkegaard. So Kierkegaard says, "We live life forwards, but we understand it backwards." How does that apply to your life, especially looking back at your early years?
My goodness, in so many ways. And Kierkegaard, as you know, is a very difficult and challenging philosopher. But he's definitely right about this one. I turned 50 very recently. And when I looked back, I saw how my life formed in so many ways that I never anticipated it to form. I never, in fact, anticipated to spend my life in Cyprus and to be part of this culture, a culture I willingly left behind for a few years, but then returned. So I think in so many ways, when you go back, you look at those early years and you realize that not that many things prepare you for what is to come. Those early years do not necessarily equip you for what you will encounter in the future. Because, of course, you never know what it is that you will encounter. But then again, you need to take a leap of faith, speaking of Kierkegaard. And I think most of us do that.
So let's go back to your early years. What was the social script around you at the time, and what was the society, the environment that you were kind of growing up in?
Again, this is something that I often talk about, and as you know, I very often talk about it in my classes, and I talk about it especially to my female students, because we tend to think that we come from the same culture, but we do not. I grew up in a context that was very different to what Cyprus is today. And people might say, but how much difference could 30 or 40 years make? And the answer is a huge difference. And when I go back to those early years, I think about education and what education prepared you for. And for young girls, it really meant preparing you for a job. Because in post-war Cyprus, women were expected to work, but they were not necessarily expected to have ambitions. So ambition was never cultivated in little girls. So little girls could not have big dreams as easily as boys were expected to have them. So when I speak to my students, I often narrate incidents from school or discussions I had with my childhood friends, especially during puberty when so much of your identity is formed. And I have literally watched their jaws dropped when I talk about these conversations, because it was just expected that you would grow up and the dream, the Cypriot dream, if you like, would be to land a good job, possibly in the public sector, maybe become a teacher if you were good at it, marry, of course, have 2 children, buy a house, buy a car. And there's nothing wrong with all those things. I mean, I love having them.
Yeah.
But that was more or less what was expected of us, of young girls back in the late 70s and early 80s when I was growing up.
So what was, at that time, what was the career or kind of future you wanted rather than, let's say, your parents or the society around you?
You know, it's funny because I've changed my mind so many times about what I wanted to be when I grow up. But then I've always known that I'm going to do something. And it was expected in my family that I would do something, because I learned very early on in life that a woman can never rely on someone else for her income, that you have to have your own financial resources. And this is something that my family taught me. And I always knew that I would have to do something. But I think I changed my mind so many times about the kind of career I wanted. And yet I became the thing that I've always enacted in my, everyday games with my friends. I became a teacher because I always wanted to be the teacher of the group. So I would sit everybody around and then I would pretend I was the teacher. My extended family affectionately calls me and called me back then "Kalos στη δασκάλα." And it was very funny that I actually eventually became that, even though I at some point wanted to become a lawyer and a politician and a writer and all sorts of things. And my parents always thought, no, it'd be a good thing if you got a job in the public sector. But of course, I think that would have just disappointed me, because I could not spend my life working in something where I have to follow the motions. And so I think there was no destination in a sense, but rather a sort of messy kind of sketch, which then took form.
And what was your relationship with literature? Because that's what you ended up studying.
I've always loved stories.
Yeah.
I loved stories and I love storytelling. And I've always loved listening to stories, people's stories and fairy tales from my grandmothers. Of course, my grandmothers always had stories from the war because that defined their generation. So though that was not pleasant, it gave me a lot of perspective. So it kind of formed my identity as the child of refugees from the north of Cyprus. But I loved stories. Stories allowed me to travel and to imagine that there is another option for pretty much everybody. And I've always read books. I started reading books from a very early age. And I remember that my parents would force me to turn off the light. And they would threaten me that I would, harm my eyes if I just kept, reading in the dark. And then I kept doing it because it just was such a pleasure. And so I grew up realizing that I loved analyzing stories and being in the story. I was never a very good fiction writer, and I realized that early on. So that's great. but I loved reading other people's stories and thinking about those stories and talking about those stories. So I eventually made it my profession in many ways.
Was there a lot of encouragement for you to go into it, and go and study an English degree?
There was, in the sense that my parents must have thought that this would be a very good career, become an English teacher. And at the time, it was quite a a suitable option for a woman in Cyprus. So I think that when I went to university, when I got accepted at the University of Cyprus, and I'm always very proud to say that I'm one of the first generations of graduates. When I joined, the University of Cyprus was in its third year, and it was a very vibrant space. I realize now all our instructors, our professors were very driven, and this was inspiring for me. So I'm pretty sure that my parents thought that I went to university improving my English so that I would one day become a good English teacher. But of course, little did they know that, of course, I was reading about feminism and postmodern fiction and critical and cultural theory. But they were proud, and they were always very supportive of my decisions. Yeah.
Well, talking of your parents, I kind of want to analyze the landscape a little bit. Who were the women in your life that you were looking up to, and what kind of idea of womanhood were they exhibiting, or at least the one you were kind of absorbing?
I know it sounds cliche, but definitely my mother. My mother has been an inspiration in my life. And I always get a little bit emotional when I talk about my mother. And I'm very lucky to still have both my parents. But she's been an inspiration to me in so many ways that I cannot explain, and in so many other ways that I can explain. And one of them is that she taught me very early on in life that I need to learn to be independent. Very early on in life, at a time when women were not pushed towards a career, she said to me, you always need to have your own money. You should never rely financially on anyone. And I understood this from a very early age. And she always pushed me to do better. She always believed that I could do well. And this is a woman who has very little formal education, and yet has worked very, very hard for many, many years, alongside my father, of course, to provide that I could get the best education I could get, that I could live a better life than they did. So my mother has been in many ways a driving force. She is my most honest critic by far, but of course she is my fierce supporter, and that has never changed throughout the years. So I've been fortunate to be raised by a mother who has taught me that, who has taught me to cultivate a great relationship with my sister, and who led me to understand that having mothers of sorts throughout your life may be very beneficial, but there comes a point where you need to demythologize them, where you need to look back, assess what their story has led to, and if you examine that, learn something for yourself and move on. You still love them, you still admire them, but as one of my mentors from my early academic years always said to me, according to Kristeva, you need to kill the mother to save the mother. So in a sense, you need to let go so that you can become your own person.
Yeah. You left Cyprus. Why did you make that decision?
I think growing up in my generation, most of us wanted to leave Cyprus. And I think the dream back then was that one enters a state university in Greece, and then, you enjoy the amazing life of the big city that is Athens or maybe Thessaloniki. But of course, I never actually applied to these universities, so I don't know why I was so upset when I didn't get into these universities. I never applied to it. So
did you just wait for their invitation?
I know. It's like my first option was Corfu, and Corfu is an island.
Yeah.
And I wanted to study translation and interpretation. I'm so glad they only accepted 4 people a year because, quite frankly, I would have been very unhappy to do that because it's not what suits me, my personality, if you like. So my second choice was the University of Cyprus. You have no idea how much I cried when I entered the University of Cyprus, and it was not tears of joy. I can tell you. I was disappointment, but I don't know why I was so disappointed. I made that choice. My parents were, of course, over the moon. But then I spent the next 4 years dreaming of the day that I could go away. I could go to a different country. And when the moment came, I was terrified because I traveled to a country I'd never visited before. And I chose Edinburgh because a friend of mine had said to me, we at Cambridge respect nobody other than Edinburgh. So I thought, there must be something to it.
Yeah.
So I applied to Edinburgh. I got accepted. So I was like, I'm going there. Why not? But then when I went there, I was shocked. I was shocked because I was all alone for the first time in my life. I felt I could not speak English. I could not understand a word people were saying to me. And the Scots are wonderful people. Yeah. They're really, really wonderful. But it took me maybe 2 or 3 months to start getting used to the context. And then after the first 3 months, I was home, and for a child of post-war Cyprus, for someone who has always felt displaced, because you understand, for those of us who were born after the war, who never knew the other side, who only learned about it from stories, it was always difficult to identify with one part of the island or another. And you were expected not to forget δεν ξεχνώ, something that you never knew. But how can you do that? I belong to a generation that effectively lived displacement vicariously, because technically we weren't displaced, but then we never felt at home, a lot of us. So Edinburgh became such an easy home for me eventually, because I didn't have to take sides and because I could form my identity. I could be my own person. And even though it was a decision that was made sort of in a sense of going through the motions, you do a first degree in Cyprus, then you do a postgrad abroad. It was life-changing for me. And it definitely formed who I became, my identity, and how I think about identity.
Who was the person that you could see yourself becoming during those years? What was the difference?
I think in your early 20s, it's quite difficult to know who you are. And I think it's especially difficult for women. I've said that many times. Because of so many social and societal pressures, women come into themselves quite later in life because they feel so many obligations, because there are so many expectations of them. So I didn't really have a very clear vision of who I was or who I wanted to be, because I was getting so many mixed messages about who I needed to be happy. And happiness is the ultimate goal. But we don't often realize, we think that the ultimate goal is a great job or a big salary or having a family or finding a great partner. But really the ultimate goal is happiness, is to be satisfied. And it takes women many, many years to feel satisfied because we all learn, I think men and women, we learn not to be satisfied. We are instructed by culture to constantly want more. This is what keeps the system going anyway. So I suppose becoming yourself takes time. And I didn't get a clear idea of who I was until I entered my 40s and after I came back to Cyprus, which is strange because Cyprus is the place I ran away from.
Let's look. I kind of want to pause at, you're in Edinburgh, you're experiencing, you've chosen to study critical theory. You are getting deeper into like feminism and all the other theories within your degree. What was that experience like? And especially looking at your own life back in Cyprus, what were you kind of being now exposed to?
Yeah, my first months at the University of Cyprus, I still remember it vividly. I mean, aside from the fact that it was bitterly cold and I was constantly so cold and I always had a cold. So it was just crazy and embarrassing to be in a classroom where you're constantly coughing. But it was even worse that I kept feeling that I shouldn't be here, that perhaps I'm not good enough to be here. What am I doing here with all these people that came from amazing universities? We were all looking at each other, terrified, but then, put up an act of confidence because we wanted to terrify each other. It was a very competitive environment. And even though my university and my studies in Cyprus had equipped me to be there, I spent my first 2 months perhaps trying to understand why I deserve to be here. And then at some point something clicked and it allowed me to share with others. And it allowed for a more friendly atmosphere in the class. And this group of people became inseparable for the next 7 years. I have the fondest memories from sharing classes with these people, from discussions at the pubs. Edinburgh pubs are very intellectual. 5 o'clock onwards, you can share the greatest wisdom over pints of beer, and people become extremely wise after they've had beer. And I value this greatly, the connection with people from different cultures, how it gave me a completely different perspective of the world, how it allowed me to understand my limitations set by my culture, but also by myself. How it allowed me to challenge what I thought I knew as certainties. And of course, critical and cultural theory has this effect on people. And I'm very grateful to know that my students often say that their interaction with critical and cultural theory and the text I've given them in the same manner I was given this text has changed their outlook in the world and has changed the way they see themselves in the world and has positioned them differently. It has formed their lives. And people who do not study it, who have not read it, who have not come in contact with this text may not be able to understand it. But it forms you. It allows you to exercise those critical skills that you need in order to improve yourself and to improve your surroundings.
So you finished your degree. What was the first job that you took after graduation? Well,
I was very fortunate, in fact, and I'm grateful for the many opportunities I've had in my life, because whilst in Edinburgh, I worked as a tutor and I had the opportunity for at least 2 years to run the Scottish University's International Summer School, which was quite an experience. I get to say to people that I had drinks with Alistair Gray back in the day. We shared a gin and tonic. It was great. But, now that everybody watches films like Poor Things, and I'm like, yeah, let me tell you about that night. I had drinks with Alistair Gray and his partner. And it was great. So I had the opportunity to meet amazing people. I met Elaine Showalter in the context of the summer school. We got the opportunity to go to the Edinburgh Book Festival, and I got to listen to Margaret Atwood and Salman Rushdie, and you can't get these things anywhere else. And so I felt that surely the road was paved for me. Everything was ready for me to have an amazing and impressive academic career. And sadly, that didn't happen. Because when I turned 30, I decided to come back to Cyprus. And I decided to come back to Cyprus, not because I really wanted it, but because there was a lot of pressure from my family to come back. They felt that I've been away long enough. They felt they needed me emotionally. They felt that my presence here would benefit them, but it would also benefit me, because in the meantime, I had also worked at the University of Cyprus as a visiting lecturer for a semester. So they thought other jobs will come as easy as this one came. But of course, that was not the case. So I always say, and I say this to my students very often, just to basically explain how, it's great to have ambitions, but things don't always work out the way you expect them to work out. And I always say that I expected that they would have rolled the red carpet for me at the Larnaca airport, and I would be welcomed because I had a degree from a great university, and I was so important. Self-importance comes with, youth. But of course, the only thing that welcomed me in Cyprus was the humidity at Larnaca airport. And then I spent the next 8 months being unemployed and having lost all sense of purpose because there were no jobs available to me at the time, and because I suddenly had lost all that independence that I had worked so hard for, an income from all the jobs I had here and there in academia, living on my own, supporting myself. And it was difficult. It was very difficult at first. So my first job was at a private school in Nicosia. And I got that job because someone else had a heart attack. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? So I got this call one day that there's a job opening at such and such private school. And it was a very good private school. And would I be interested? And of course, of course I'm not interested. Yeah. But my parents said, just try it for a few months. If it does not work out, then okay, just go back to Edinburgh, and that's the end of that. And you know what? I did. And it was one of the best things I did. I learned so much working with teenagers. Teenagers are difficult. They're not the easiest group. 16-year-olds preparing for their IGCSEs. It's
the worst time.
Oh my God. It's like an education in itself for the instructor. But I learned so much, and I made new friends, and suddenly my outlook on my prospects in Cyprus changed. 4 months down the line, the position opened at European University. I was invited for an interview. I got the job, and the rest is history.
I want to now kind of go a little bit back at the point where you are in Edinburgh, you finished your master's. What led you to actually want to continue into a PhD and stay in academia? Was this something that, I don't know, was an option or even an idea you had in your head prior to going to Edinburgh. Were there a lot of people with PhDs in Cyprus at that time, especially within like a literature degree?
Yeah. When I went to Edinburgh, the plan was as follows. You go for a year, you do your master's, you come back, you find a job. And that was the plan. And then I was seduced by Edinburgh. I really was. It's a gorgeous city. But of course, it was also the sense of self that I developed being there. And cities have that effect on people. It's the way that culture and your surroundings interact and build this narrative. You build this narrative for yourself. And so the city seduced me. But of course, it was the work as well. It was how stimulating everything was around me. And this group of people that we shared common interests, that we would discuss challenging ideas in classrooms, but also at the pub. And it was how I felt about who I was in that context that made me apply on a whim for a scholarship that was offered. My parents had made it very clear to me that, of course, they could not financially support another 3 years and pay tuition. And by the way, back in the day, it was not home fees, it was overseas fees because Cyprus was not in the EU. So, of course, it made no sense for my parents, and of course they could not afford that. So I applied for a scholarship, and I got the scholarship. And I was shocked. Because up until that point, I never thought I was good enough to get a scholarship. Self-doubt is something that many women carry with them. And when I got the scholarship, I thought, okay, this is meant to be. I need to find ways to make this work. And this is why I say I've had such a supportive family. I had a scholarship, but scholarships are never enough. So when they realized I was determined, then they did whatever they had to do to make sure that I could stay on and that I could do my PhD. Because they realized that was important to me. And, when they heard PhD, people didn't go, people from working class family didn't necessarily go off to do PhDs. And there weren't that many of us. It wasn't that easy to do a PhD back in the day. I always say it is much easier now. The technology available to people. And I was terrified when I decided to do a PhD. I questioned myself every single day. I didn't know that I could do it, but I wanted to. And even when I came back to Cyprus, no, there weren't that many of us. And that was actually fortunate for me. Things are far more competitive today.
And what is the academic environment here in Cyprus for women?
Right. I have so much to say. Because, of course, as you grow up, you see a lot of things that you didn't see as a younger person. The academic scene has changed. Cyprus is now a country with so many state and non-state universities. I think we have such a high number of universities that it shocks people beyond Cyprus to know we have that many universities. And yet we attract a lot of students. We are a good destination for students because Cyprus is a safe place to be, and it offers great quality of life, of course. But the academic scene has changed, and it has changed in a positive manner. I see that now precisely because there are so many universities and so many of us that have returned from studying abroad. And when I look back, I know that most of us felt that we were destined for the state university. And I'm pretty sure all of us were disappointed when we did not secure a place at the state university. But of course, the state university cannot absorb all PhDs. I'm extremely grateful for all the private institutions. And I've learned since 2007, when I joined one, that it is the people that make the university. Mm-hmm. It's not the buildings, it's not the administration. It is us, it is the academics. I think we are the heart and soul and the driving force in these institutions. And the sooner we understand this, the better for the academic community of our universities and overall. We had the opportunity to go beyond the boundaries set by our physical space. When I came back, it never occurred to me that I owe anything back to this place, that it never occurred to me that I could give something back to this place. I wanted to stay abroad. I wanted to stay in Edinburgh. It would have been easier in some ways because the culture was already there. When we came back, when my generation came back, we had to put everything together. We had to set the foundation for what you see around us today. When I returned in 2006 with a PhD on transgender narratives, nobody knew what transgender was. How many people do you think talked about transgender identities? I was the weird person in the conversation. I was the odd woman out. I was the one that was unconventional. I'm no longer unconventional in that sense because the conversation began many years ago. And looking back, I am proud I am one of these people, this group of people that formed the academic scene in Cyprus. And I have a lot of respect for the institution that nurtured a lot of us. Because let's face it, when the University of Cyprus was created, it was such a novelty. It was groundbreaking and it came under a lot of scrutiny. I can tell you that. It came under scrutiny by us, its own students. We were thinking, it's not a proper university. But it gave us the foundation to go beyond the limits of Cyprus. And I'm actually very grateful that so many of us came back and are somehow contributing in small ways even to the developing culture of university life in Cyprus.
What are the challenges you're hearing from your female students about identity formation, but within identity formation of becoming a woman or living as a woman in Cyprus? What are you hearing from them? Or what are you seeing as well?
When I was a student, I had a vision of the world where the world would progress in a linear manner. I thought that when I first read Judith Butler and talked about performance and performativity and how it relates to the formation of identity, when I was writing about embodying identity and embodying gender, that the world would progress in a linear manner, and it did not. And I realize today that the challenges that my students face as young women are in fact much greater than the challenges I faced as a young woman. Because my students live on the cusp of online and offline world. And these days I work a lot on the ways the online presence affects our offline existence and how the two work to form identities. And I see the identities of young women being formed in ways that can be very dangerous for their very own survival, to be honest. And a lot of the work that I find interesting these days has to do with gender-based violence that stems from technology. And when I talk to my students, I see that a lot of what they think about themselves and the way their lives are informed about the world comes from social media technologies. And a lot of their traumas come from it. And the relationships often are born within the context of social media. And I find that this is a very difficult world to navigate unless you have media literacy, critical media literacy, which means to understand the powers that form the culture that formulates you. You're not a passive individual in this context. We are all active agents. We do have agency. But much of my work these days, both in class and through my funded projects, is to make people aware, not just young women, but also young men, that they do not have to be what the patriarchal system that is promoted via a lot of social media these days tells them to be. They do not have to be violent in order to be proper men. And women do not have to be sex kittens in order to be liked, to get approval. They can be, if they wish to. They have a choice, but they have to also be strong to understand that the system will not do them any favors. So what we all need to do is to change this system, to make it better for everyone, not in a way that one dominates over the other, but rather where we all have equal opportunities depending on where we start from, because this is the basis of equality. It's about equity. It's about being given opportunities that actually suit your circumstances, and we do not all start from the same starting point.
There's a lot of debate on who is responsible for actually the behaviors of users of social media. So there's been a lot of lawsuits against like some of the CEOs of some of the biggest social media platforms, because there has been like tragic deaths, there's been tragic occurrences with somebody's interaction with social media. Where do you stand? Who do you think is responsible for their actions on social media? Is it the platforms themselves? Is it the government who should be taking more responsibility, or is it just the users?
I've actually thought about this a lot, and I talk about it a lot. Do I think platforms should be held accountable? Yes, I do. I do believe that platforms should be held accountable for the materials that they allow to publish, for the content they allow to be developed. And there's been this big discussion, I'm sure you're aware of it, about this sites, these websites instructing young men how to drug and rape women. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And there's so many more ways in which social media can be extremely harmful for people. So yes, the platforms should be held accountable. They make a lot of money out of what it is that we do on social media. And it is very often said that this is the only industry in which we consume what we produce, right? There's no such thing as a freebie in this world. You actually contribute to this. Having said that, I believe that we need to promote media literacy, digital media literacy. We need to encourage an understanding of the ways social media form the way we see the world. We need to talk about disinformation. We need to talk about echo chambers. We need to talk about the ways every single piece of information that we consume is mediated. We need to understand, we need to be able to understand the narratives constructed for us by the media. That's traditional media and new media. So I see a real, genuine urgency for the promotion of digital media literacy, and not in a technical sense, but rather in the sense of critical media literacy, to cultivate an understanding and an awareness of the powers that work to create this kind of culture. And when you talk about misogyny online, you can't just blame the platforms. Misogyny online exists because misogyny offline exists. And you cannot differentiate between the two. What happens online has very real, very material consequences offline. And for me, it is extremely important that as prosumers, producers, and consumers of content, we understand this. And we need to understand this not just as educators, but also as parents, as participants in this culture. And we need to promote it for our children. I mean, teenagers are at great risk today. And I'm really amazed at how well a lot of the teenagers cope in this world today. We had far fewer challenges by comparison.
Do you think governments should ban social media for teenagers? Because I know there's been a trend, and even Cyprus is jumping on it.
That's not going to work. That has been my position from the start. I have great doubts, first of all, how technically this would work, how you actually identify as a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old on social media. Will you be showing your identity, for example? And isn't this a violation of personal data, for example? I'm not sure it's practical. Also, I'm not sure that you can indeed stop it now. What you can do is perhaps force some controls, but they will not be effective unless you implement real measures that promote critical media literacy. You need to have policies. You need to have a policy when it comes to media literacy, and Cyprus is still behind on this. Okay, there have been efforts. There have been a lot of independent efforts, and of course the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute tries to do what they can with promoting such initiatives in schools. And of course the Cyprus Radio Television Authority, who's also responsible for this, and I've worked with both of them on various projects. But you need a strategy. You need a strategy to promote media literacy, and it needs to come from the state. You cannot just ban social media. You need a strategy, and a strategy involves a lot more actors than just the platforms or, setting regulations. Okay, these only work if the people understand why these regulations are in place.
That's very true. I want to now kind of move towards the end of our conversation, and I want to ask, what are the values that you live by?
Oh, it's hard to say. It's hard to say because I try to constantly improve my, the way I think about the world. So I guess one of the values is self-improvement, trying to understand what works, what doesn't work for me and for others, trying to create a space where others can grow. This is very important to me. It's important to me as an academic and as an educator. Some of my greatest joys have come from my work with young people such as yourself. And I think what I'm committed to is to create a space where others can grow, where others can get at least the opportunities that I got, if possible, have better opportunities than I have. And I try to work with integrity. It's not always easy. You have to work very hard to maintain integrity and to always be responsible for your actions, to understand to what extent your responsibility lies, and then to hold yourself accountable. But then that also comes with wanting others to have the same kind of sense of accountability. And as you know, the state often does not do that. Others often do not do that. I get very frustrated with my students many times when they do not own their mistakes. One of the phrases that most of us in academia dislike is me έκοψε, she failed me, but I passed, πέρασα. So if it's success, they did it by themselves. And if it's a failure, it is the instructor's fault. And to me, that's all about accountability for all of us. And effectively, what I think I want is to create a healthier society. So I genuinely hope that what we do in academia contributes to this in even a small way, because I'm happier with making a small difference than making no difference.
My last question, for those who are on the brink of, making decisions about their future, what message would you like to leave them?
Oh, I found myself in a position very recently where I had to give my stepchildren advice. And it's not easy because, as I said at the very beginning, your early years do not necessarily prepare you for what is to come, especially at this point. Artificial intelligence is changing so much around us. I cannot advise anybody on what profession to choose because I don't know what professions will be available to people in 5 years from now. So what I would advise people is to follow the same advice that I took from my family back in my early years. Invest in yourselves. Invest in knowledge, in self-improvement, and understand that learning is a lifelong process. And that's learning in every possible way. And be adaptable. Adaptability is key here. I've had to do it. I hope I did it successfully. I advise my students to learn to be flexible and adaptable. And of course, to transfer skills, the skills they've earned from their degrees. They will not necessarily secure them a job, but they might allow them to develop into the person they need to be for a job they actually choose. So I believe that in a sense, the only kind of investment you can make is in yourself and in your self-growth.
Thank you. Thank you, Charis, for joining me today. It's been wonderful.